The paranormal, UFOs, monsters, mysteries. You're listening to Talking Weird. And now, from a cabin deep in the Northwoods, your hosts, Dr. Dean Bertram and Jenn Durrell.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to Talking Weird on the Untold Radio Network. I'm one of your hosts, Dean Bertram, and joining me tonight is the always amazing, spectacular, and brilliant Jenn Durrell. How's your week going at this stage, baby? We've had a lot of snow up here. I hope you've got better weather in Missouri.
I think we're getting ready to get something tomorrow, so we might get some of that snow.
Okay.
Yeah. But I haven't had anything too exciting going on with me. Just the normal playing around with the Ghost Tube app and getting some very intelligent conversation back and forth. But how about you?
Well, nothing as exciting as talking to ghosts on an app. Have you got any examples you can share?
Well, I wouldn't say ghosts. I mean, It seems like it's more of interaction with something that is a different frequency.
Something wicked this way comes, perhaps.
Well, you never know. No one really knows, so... But did you have anything?
What do you think it is? Give me an example of some interaction this week.
Well, I was with a coworker and she ended up getting a couple of things personally for her, which was quite interesting. Didn't really expect that, but just a lot of information explaining what we were doing, like as if they were in the room. They knew exactly what we were doing, kind of knew what question we were getting ready to ask before we asked it. They'd automatically answer it. We didn't even have to ask it. So reading our minds. That's what it seemed like.
A telepathic trickster.
Could be.
Did you do the old, what am I holding in my hand routine?
No.
Chapstick. It would have said chapstick.
I know.
The Mothman Prophecy is such a spectacular film. Anyway, let's not chitter-chatter too much. You should introduce tonight's guest. I'm really looking forward to talking to him.
Well, sure. All right. So tonight's guest is a cryptozoologist and an author of fiction, primarily in horror and science fiction genres. For most of his career, he has served his community in law enforcement and has been investigating cryptids for nearly 4 decades and is the Region 2 director of the North American Dogman Project. He also hosts a popular podcast called DAX Machina. I'm going to mess it up. I am pleased to welcome our guest tonight, D.A. Roberts.
Hey, how's everybody doing tonight?
Good. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Do you want to say the title of your podcast? Jen was concerned.
Yeah, I just messed it up. I'm sure I did.
It's a DAX Machina. It's a play on the old term Deus Ex Machina.
Yes. It's the spelling that messes me up.
Well, I've had people say machina.
Yeah, it does.
There's a ghost in the machina of Jen's ghost app. Speaking of,
well, that's why it's a ghost app. You know.
Have you talked to DA at all about that? Maybe DA has some wisdom or insight on.
Oh yeah. Have you ever messed around with those? I don't mess with them too much, but I'm interested in a certain one because it seems to be working fairly well. So I just use it just to see.
I have an app called Ghost Tube.
That's the one.
I stumbled on it by accident.
Yeah.
And I've played around with it a little bit, like changing the background image colors and taking pictures like in my backyard and stuff. I tried to use it at an old Civil War graveyard not far from where I live. Mm-hmm. And the only time I've ever had this issue with my phone, it overheated and shut down.
Yes.
The only time that's ever happened to my phone.
Yeah. I've had some issues with that app when I'm getting really good conversation back and forth that seems pretty legit, it'll corrupt the files afterwards and I can't use them. Or I've had words come up that I'll see them. And then when I'll go back and check the file, because it has that little file that tells you all the words that come up, and the words are not there. They're not documented. But I saw them pop up on the screen and they said it. And I even have somebody with me that heard it too. So it's interesting.
It's weird how stuff like that interacts with electronic equipment. I've had, even going out doing cryptid research, I've had equipment just go completely dead. Stuff I had brand new batteries in, completely drained. It's weird how that happens in some places.
Yeah, that is crazy. So the first time I actually got to see you in person or meet you, or I was at the Fall Into Supernatural convention that was in Lexington. So I really enjoyed your speaking point, because you were talking about some different stories and experiences that you had, but you also fronted a Bigfoot hunt, like on that Friday night. So did you experience anything there?
That was really bizarre. I wish you'd have been out there.
I wish I was too.
It was at
always wanted to go.
The Big River Horse Ranch, which is about 5 or 6 miles outside of Lexington, Missouri. And when I say it's off the beaten path, it is really off the beaten path. It's like you turn off the highway onto a small side road, then onto a gravel road, and then it's like 3 miles down the gravel road back, very close to the Missouri River. And we went out there around 9:30, 10 o'clock that night, had a bonfire way back in the woods, and we were surrounded by trees on 3 sides. And from the moment we got there, we could hear something walking around us in the woods. Krista and my wife were sitting to the left side of the fire and kept having something throwing stuff at them. We couldn't catch it on camera. We couldn't catch it in a flashlight, but they had objects thrown at them multiple times. And the whole time we were out there, you could hear something pacing around us in the woods. And then as we were leaving, my wife and my son Noah, and my adopted son Connor, he's my son's best friend, but he's grew up at our house, so we call him our adopted son. But all 4 of us were in our SUV, and we were heading back toward town to go to our hotel. And this was midnight or a little after. So we head up the road from the horse ranch, and we're maybe a mile. We're not back to the highway yet. We're still on gravel, and there's cornfields on either side of us. And as we're approaching a house about 50 yards away, we see something emerging from the cornfield. And I had my brights up, and there were no other vehicles present. And this thing walks out, and we see it for a good 40, 50 seconds as it slowly crosses the road. And we weren't that far away, maybe 30 yards, 40 yards, because I just let my foot off the gas and almost crept to a stop, because we weren't going fast anyway, because it's a pretty rough road. So we see this thing come out, and it's kind of a dark gray color, and it's walking on all 4s, and its back was probably 6 inches to a foot higher than the front end of my SUV. And the weird thing about it is there's a reason there's the phrase deer in the headlights. You know, when you hit a deer with headlights, it usually just freezes and stares at you. This thing, it felt like it made eye contact with me specifically. It turned and looked directly at us, and the eye shine was so bright you couldn't make out the features of the head. It was bright green in the middle and faded to white as it got farther toward the outside. You couldn't make out the head features, but the body was built like a big wolf. But it was massive. It had to have been 800, 900 pounds. It crosses the road, watching me the entire time, and disappears into the corn on the other side of the field. Well, I grabbed the door handle, and my wife's like, "You are not getting out of this car." I'm a retired cop. I was armed. I was ready to go after it. I wanted to find out what the heck that was, because all of us were like, "What the hell was that?" She's like, "No, go to the hotel. We are not getting out and chasing that thing." So we go on the next day. I tell Krista and everybody about it at the Fall Into the Supernatural event there in town. And they're like, "Oh my God, that was right down the road from the ranch." I'm like, "Yeah." And we saw this thing and it wasn't like we just got a glimpse of something dart across the road. It took its time walking across the road and kept eye contact with me the entire time.
There's
Wow.
There's so many tales I hear of dogmen and wolf type things coming in and going in, coming out of and going into cornfields. Seems like it's almost like their preferred habitat. I don't know if
It's
there's,
easy to hide.
yeah, that could very well be. So much so that I think my little daughter once heard something I was listening to. It was probably on the Untold radio network, and it came up. And whenever we drive anywhere around here, because we're all woods and or cornfields, I'm that kind of part of the world, she'd always be like, a cornfield, the dog man would live in there. So it had even sunk into her subconscious. But what do you think the thing was you saw? Do you think it was a physical being, or do you think it was something supernatural, or somewhere in between the two?
I think it was a physical being, and I think it was the same thing that was pacing us around the fire. I think we saw a dog man, but I can't say for certain because I couldn't see the head. The eye shine, the reflected light back at my vehicle was so bright you couldn't make out anything but the eyes and kind of the rough shape of the head. So yeah, I can't say with any degree of certainty. And I wish I'd had my dash cam running. I really
Oh,
do.
yeah.
But we were just heading for the hotel. I didn't think I had any need to turn it on. And I would love to have caught that on camera and been able to isolate that and look at it. My wife's first impression was she said mountain lion. And I said, no, that is way too big to be a mountain lion. I mean, I grew up deer hunting. I've been in and out of the woods in Missouri my whole life. It wasn't a mountain lion. It wasn't a coyote. It wasn't a deer. It wasn't a wolf. It wasn't a bear. It was nothing I'd seen before. But it moved and acted like a big predator. And it had to have been on. Well, it was on its all fours. It had to have been at the shoulders, probably 4 feet tall.
Oh, wow. So wasn't there something that recently happened too in that same area? Because I remember
Yes, there was.
Yes. Do you want to talk about that? Because that is crazy.
About 2 weeks later,
Yeah.
I was like maybe 12 miles from the spot where we saw that. Made national news.
Mhm.
There was an Amazon driver allegedly mauled to death by a pair of dogs.
Mhm.
However, being a cop for so long, you make friends in a lot of places. Friend of a friend kind of thing. I can't give you a name, but friend of a friend knows the coroner in that county. And the coroner was like, I have never seen a body this torn up. There is no way that was dogs.
Hmm.
And even now after they, the deputies shot the dogs and claimed it was the dogs that killed this Amazon driver. They never released the results of the necropsy. They never released, whether or not there was anything found in the dog's stomach that was human tissue. And considering that they were both good-sized dogs, but the amount of damage done in the short amount of time, I really don't think it was dogs. And here's something even better. I just found out about this earlier tonight. Not far from there, about 15 miles away from that very spot, a hunter went missing. In an area he'd hunted many times. When he was overdue, they went looking for him. They found a large quantity of blood near the river and his gun. They claimed that it was deer blood and he got lost in the woods trying to track the deer. I deer hunt. I tell you, I deer hunt. I've never laid my gun down to track a wounded animal. Doesn't happen. No. They found the search and rescue was called in. They scoured the woods in the area. They called it off that night when it got really dark. And went back out the next day. Then they found his body the next day. Here's the thing. They haven't released the details about the body. 2, it didn't get cold enough that night to kill somebody. I've deer hunted my whole life. I always go prepared. I could have set. I would have the equipment, the basic equipment, to set a small fire. Yeah. I guarantee you, if this guy was an experienced deer hunter, 1, he was dressed for the situation. He would have been dressed warmly. And 2, he probably would have had the means to make a fire to keep warm. Overnight, 1 night should not have been enough to have killed this hunter. And the fact that they found a quantity of blood that they assumed was deer blood because they didn't test it, and found his gun. How weird is that? All of this right there in that small area.
Yeah, that doesn't make sense at all.
Do you think Dogman is responsible for perhaps more missing people than we're aware of? I'm thinking of things like Polites missing 411. Of course, it comes to mind.
That's a perfect example. The sheer number of people that go missing, and the missing 411 cases, I think, are the real litmus test, because he doesn't just do random missing persons. If somebody wandered off trail and they find them later, or they find the person did fall down in a crevasse, he doesn't mention those. He mentions the weird ones, the ones that went missing under particularly odd circumstances. The ones that I find most compelling, because in my law enforcement career, I have worked with tracking dogs. When they get out tracking dogs and they refuse to track, that's a huge red flag to me, because I've worked with tracking dogs. Those dogs live for the track. They cannot wait to get out and start running a track. For them to catch a scent and go, nope, I'm done, that is completely out of character for tracking dogs. That doesn't happen. They've got to be smelling something they want no part of.
Yeah. Yeah. And then of course, Missouri is like, the cave state. So that's another thing that I've noticed too, is somebody put together the maps of caves and then Bigfoot and missing people and somehow try to interlink them. Have you thought about that before? That's a possibility?
I've actually talked about that on our show. If you take a map of the David Paulides missing 411 cases and look at the large clusters of disappearance, and you overlay that with a map of the major U.S. cave systems, they correspond almost exactly.
Yeah. That's crazy.
As somebody in law enforcement, you mentioned you knew somebody who knew the coroner, so you got some inside track information on that case. Do you often find you encounter either current law enforcement or ex-law enforcement who are cognizant of cases that just don't make any sense, whether it's a murder or a missing person or an attack? Do you hear those things frequently? Or
I've talked to a lot of officers over the years, and you kind of feel people out, because when you're active in law enforcement, you don't want people to know you're into cryptozoology, because defense attorneys will get that and they'll make you look like an idiot on the defense stand and the witness stand, and then I'll tear your case apart. So I was really pretty low key about my cryptid investigation until I retired. But over the years, going to training seminars and working with other agencies, I would kind of quietly feel people out and go, "Hey, you ever have anything happen at weird in the woods?" And you'd be surprised at the number of cops I've talked to over the years that have either had an encounter or knew another officer that did, but didn't want to go on the record because they didn't want to have their name put out there. One in particular, I met at a training seminar down in northern Arkansas. Talked to the guy, lifelong deer hunter. He goes out to his deer stand one morning. The sun's not up yet. He gets up in the deer stand and he's got one of those soft-sided lunch boxes with a strap on it. Loops the strap around his leg so it won't fall out of the deer stand, and he dozes off. He said, "Well, I came to, felt like something was tugging on my lunchbox." He said, "I opened my eyes and there was this Bigfoot creature standing with its head about level with my knee." And he says, "I was 12 to 15 feet off the ground."
gosh,
He said, "This thing's head was level with my knee and it was tugging on my lunchbox." I said, "What'd you do?" He said, "I gave it the lunchbox." I said, "What after that?" He goes, "Well, it walked away. And once it was good and gone, I climbed down out of the deer stand, grabbed my stuff, and I went back to the truck, and I haven't been back since." He said, "The next day I put all my deer hunting stuff up for sale, and I haven't been back. If you want that deer stand, I'll tell you where it's at, but I'm not going back out there."
jeez. Yeah, there seems to be quite a lot of hunters who have these, experiences. I don't know what the percentage is, but I know there's an awful lot of stories. The story that Paulides talks about with Bruce Maccabee's wife, who is hunting in the woods and sees a predator type figure. And there's an old classic in UFO lore from I think the 60s or 70s, when there's somebody up a tree stand and he gets, I guess, assaulted by these robot type things that try to gas him down out of the stand. And there's clearly, again, Paulides has written whole books on hunters who have gone missing. So there seemed to be, I guess maybe you're in the woods, you're almost asking for it. I'm pro hunting and I'm pro all these things, but when you read these kind of stories, it almost makes you not want to go out there. Is the more you're aware of this, kind of dirtied your own desire to go out into the woods hunting, DA? Like, do you think twice about it? Or
Well, it affects people one of two ways. Either they're completely done and want no part of it, or, like in my case, it just fueled my desire to want to know more. My first encounter story was in a deer stand. I was about 15 years old. I was hunting on my uncle's land. He had about 160 acres of land right up against conservation land. So there should not have been anybody out there but me. So I'm up in my deer stand, and it's not quite daylight, and I was setting up there. I had a pretty powerful rifle. I had a British 303, an Enfield 303. I've got it's right back there behind my green screen. I've had that thing forever.
Yeah, they're a nice
But
rifle. I used to shoot them all the time in Australia. Very popular in Australia because they're ex-military. So in the old surplus days, they were everywhere. And
oh yeah, and they're spot on nail driver accurate.
Yeah.
I've harvested quite a few deer with that thing over the years. But anyway, I'm setting up in this deer stand, and I know there's not supposed to be anybody out there, and I've got a two-way Motorola radio that my uncle would have called me on if it was him. But I hear something, well, someone, it was bipedal. I could hear walking up behind my tree stand, and I was 10 to 12 feet off the ground in a good size oak, so you couldn't just lean out and look around. It was a big tree. Well, I hear crunch, crunch, crunch in the leaves behind me, and I'm thinking it's got to be my uncle because there shouldn't be anybody else out there, and it's getting pretty close. So I go, "Hey, who's back there?" And it just stopped dead in its tracks, and there was a silence for a long time, and the woods were dead quiet. And I hear it's just completely silent for a second. Then it takes in this huge deep breath. It goes, and I hear it turn and walk away. And by the time I got down out of the deer stand, there was nothing there. I could see impressions with my flashlight where something had been, but it was gone. So flash forward a year, same deer stand, same property, another part of the field. I was out in the deer stand, that same deer stand, and there are parts of my uncle's land. He was my uncle married my aunt, my mother's sister. He was full blood Cherokee. My uncle Buddy. Everything I know about tracking and hunting, I learned from that guy. Amazing, like a second dad to me. Also, ironically, taught me most of what I know about cryptids, but that's another story. But anyway, I'm out on the land, and I'm not anywhere near the section of land I know I'm not supposed to be on. So I'm waiting, and I passed on a couple of does. I had buck fever. I wanted a good buck, and finally, it pays off. Patience pays off, and this good sized buck comes out. He was probably a 12 pointer. I was thinking, man, this one I'm gonna have to get this one mounted. So I wait for the moment with that British 303, and bam, I hit him right in the sweet spot. He goes straight down. I'm like, I got him. So as I'm climbing down out of the tree, I see him wobbly get to his feet and start heading off. And tracking deer once you've shot one is not uncommon. I've done it 1,000 times. So I head over there, and I find a large quantity of blood on the ground. So I know I got him good. And pieces of lung tissue, which we refer to as lung butter. There was lung butter on the ground. So I'm like, I got him. He's not going far. So I'm following the blood trail, and these are like big drops, not like little bitty drops. They're good sized drops. I'm like, this thing's bleeding out fast. So I know it's not going far, and it's heading toward the section of land I know I'm not supposed to be on. But I'm not gonna abandon it. Like, once you shoot it, you're gonna go get it. It jumps down into a ravine, into a dry creek bed, and it was 20, 25 feet down. I didn't want to break a leg, so I'm like, I got to find a place to get down. I could see where it had fallen. It jumped right down there, and it was laying, not moving, in the leaf litter. So I backtrack down this ravine until I get a spot that's about 6 feet off the ground. I scramble down the bank and head back to the same spot where I knew this deer was. And I find the leaf litter crushed down and another significant quantity of blood. This is obviously the spot where it bled out. Deer's gone. And at the time, Missouri had not reintroduced black bears. There were no black bears in southern Missouri. Hadn't seen one in 100 years. There hadn't been a confirmed sighting of a wolf in Missouri in probably, since the late 1800s. They were hunted to extinction around here. Coyotes, still a thing, but when coyotes attack a kill, they destroy it. Plus, you don't see them out during the day much. So if coyotes had gotten to it, they would have eaten it on the spot, and there would have been pieces everywhere. Plus, I was only gone like 5 minutes at the most. Mountain lions will drag it up into a tree. There are no drag marks. There are no blood drops. There are no footprints because it's in a dry creek bed. There's rocks. So I start spiraling out as far as I can go in every direction, trying to find blood drops, and I find nothing. So I get on the radio, and I call my Uncle Buddy, and I said, hey, I think somebody's out here on your land. Somebody stole my deer. And he said, where are you at? I told him. He's like, you're not supposed to be in that section, right? And I said, yeah, I shot him up in the field, but this is where it went. He said, I'm telling you, you're not going to find the deer. You need to get out of there. I said, I've got a 12-point buck out here. Somebody's took. He said, I'm telling you right now, no person took your deer. Get out of there before you wind up missing like it. Get back to the house and I'll tell you what's going on. And he'd apparently been seeing Bigfoot creatures move through his land for years because he lived right along the Niagara River Valley. He'd been seeing them for years, and that was the section of land he said don't go to because if you go in there messing around, you might not come back out. Hey, that was the area close to the conservation land, and he said don't hunt there, don't go there, don't camp there, don't fish there, stay out of that area.
Gosh. Do you think there's a relationship between Bigfoot and Dogman? I know there's some disagreements about, whether maybe one is actually mistaken of the other, or whether these things get on, or whether these things are the Keelian type idea that they're all manifestations of the same type of thing. Or what's your take on the difference between Dogman and Bigfoot, if there is one?
According to the Choctaw, their oral tradition talks about a war fought between clans of Bigfoot, clans of Dogman over hunting rights. Hunting a particular area territory. I believe they're flesh and blood creatures. I believe they're both very different, and I believe they compete for resources. Especially got large predators in an area. Even bears, large predators will compete for resources. The lore on Dogman, the phrase Dogman has only gained popularity in recent years, but the lore on Dogman, the Dogman creature, dates back to antiquity. Some of the first recorded references to dog-headed creatures are in Egyptian mythology. You've got Wepelwet and Anubis. Of course, you've got Greek and Roman references to the Cynocephalus. They were tribes of dog-headed soldiers that they fought in both northern Africa and in India. And even in India today, there's still stories of these dog-headed warriors up in remote mountain passes. So these stories of dog-headed creatures date back to antiquity, to our earliest recorded history. Both Christopher Columbus and Marco Polo in their journals mentioned seeing cynocephali, men with the heads of dogs on their journeys. In Catholic iconography, Saint Christopher is known as the dog-headed saint. You can that's public knowledge. You can Google that. They're Catholic Catholic references in illuminated manuscripts that show Saint Christopher with the head of a dog, performing miracles with the head of a dog. So these references exist going back down through the centuries. In fact, in the area around Land Between the Lakes, back before it was Land Between the Lakes, it used to be known as Land Between the Rivers before the Tennessee Valley Authority dammed those two rivers back in 1963. So when that area was known as Land Between the Rivers, there are sightings of dog-headed creatures dating back to the late 1600s by French trappers.
Huh. Do you think reports of lycanthropy were just people seeing creatures that were bipedal canids, or do you think there actually is some type of supernatural transformation of man into beast historically?
Now, again, there are no experts in this field. All we have is theory, and my particular theory is much like the aurora borealis. Vikings used to say that it was the light of the stars reflecting off the armor of the Valkyries. It was an attempt to explain a phenomenon they didn't understand. I think the same thing happens with werewolves. In the old Romanian tradition, the Varkalak. I think that was an attempt to explain a natural creature. Because we know in the Indus Valley, in India, in Northern Africa, they had already been seeing them, Europeans dating back to the Roman Empire, and the Greeks and Alexander the Great had mentioned encountering these things. So we know these things have been in that area. I think the stories of the werewolf evolved to explain these creatures because they didn't know how to explain them.
So do you think you could shoot one and like it would drop over dead like a normal wolf if you encountered it in the woods? Like if you had your Lee Enfield 303 with you and you got a bead on it and shot it, you think that'd drop it? Or
well, I think these creatures, being what they are, Bigfoot are described as anywhere from 6 to 12 feet tall and weighing as much as 1,200 pounds. That is a massive animal with a lot of thick muscle tissue and will have to have thick bone to support a frame that big. Dogmen are described between 6 and 9 feet tall. If you get an animal that big, it's going to have thick muscle mass and thick bone. Well, for example, it wasn't a few years ago, a park ranger in Denali National Park was looking for a missing hiker, and they suspected he'd been eaten by a bear. He was charged by a grizzly bear, and he shot the bear 7 times with a 7mm Magnum. The bear didn't drop. This guy had the presence of mind to back away while reloading and shot it 7 more times before he finally killed the bear. When they performed the necropsy on the bear, in the bear's sternum were 6 .38 caliber slugs that had embedded in the bone but didn't penetrate enough to kill the bear. Same thing happened with his first 7 rounds.
Wow.
They didn't penetrate enough to kill the bear. When they opened the bear up, they found the missing hiker and the .38 revolver that put the slugs there. So this is a creature we know about, a bear that had thick enough muscle mass that bullets didn't penetrate. I think if you're going to bring down a Bigfoot creature or a Dogman, and I don't recommend it. I'm not a pro kill guy. I don't want to be the one that goes out and shoots one to bring it in. The only way I would shoot one is in self-defense. If I had to defend myself or defend someone with me, that's the only way. I just want to put that out there. The only reason I would shoot one is in defense. I would aim for large artery groups. Yeah, the skull is going to be thick. Aim for the neck. Aim for the brachial plexus. Aim for the big arteries in the legs. Anything in the pelvic girdle is going to bleed like crazy. I think the only way to bring one down successfully is if you're going to hit it in those large artery groups. Trying to go through the sternum like we were trained in law enforcement to shoot center mass, I think you're just going to piss it off.
Yeah. Since we're talking about different theories and stuff, so there is something that I've kind of been obsessed with lately. And since you're from Missouri as well and aware of a lot of the history and you know about Native American culture, there are a lot of prehistoric cemeteries or graves or mounds that have been unearthed. And Missouri has supposedly had giants, and there was a Native American culture, before the ones that we know of that were supposedly giants. And then that even goes back further if you want to talk about the Book of Enoch, So I was just kind of wondering, have you ever thought that maybe the giants, Nephilim, or anything like that were somehow, or maybe the Bigfoot or Sasquatch is a descendant from that? Like, would that, possibly be the same creature?
I tried to look for. I try to use Occam's razor. I'm a physical evidence guy.
Yeah.
Being trained law enforcement, I look for the things that explain the situation that don't require a lot of fantastical involvement.
Right.
You can explain how Bigfoot can cloak without talking about portals or going to other dimensions, because even Doug Hychak, who hosted Monster Quest, has noted that Sasquatch hair has a clear shaft with no medulla. It picks up the color of light around it. If it's in among green plants, it's going to appear green. It's a natural ghillie suit and an evolutionary tactic for a creature that doesn't want to be found. Occam's razor would say Gigantopithecus would be the most logical explanation for why Bigfoot exists. I think it's a North American ape. It's an undocumented North American ape. And if you look at Google Earth, the actual Earth view, not the stenciled map, you can look from East Texas to northern Canada and find huge sections of unbroken green. There are tons and tons of areas of habitat of deep wilderness, even here in Missouri, like the Mark Twain National Forest, or right down the road in the Ozarks National Forest. Those are millions of acres of pristine forest land that aren't allowed to be developed. I've got a crazy theory if you want to go down the rabbit hole with me, though.
Oh, yeah.
One of the earliest known accounts that has been recorded in history of a Bigfoot attack involving a fatality is the Bauman incident. The Bauman incident, I think everybody's familiar with it, but a lot of people don't realize the Bauman incident was first recorded in Teddy Roosevelt's book, The Wilderness Hunter.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
the level of detail that he got and produced in that story is tremendous. I've been taking reports most of my life from people that lived in the backwoods and hillbillies and mountain men, and you just don't get that level of detail out of them. It's like pulling teeth to get the story out of them in the first place, let alone knowing what the trap line was like or what the foliage was like where they set their camp up. The level of detail in that leads me to think, and there's a lot of people that agree with me, that Teddy Roosevelt was Bauman. That was actually happened to him. And because he had political aspirations, he didn't want to go on record and say, my partner was killed by a monster and I saw this thing. So if you can accept that Teddy Roosevelt was Bauman, flash forward to Teddy Roosevelt as president, what's one of the first things he does? He created the National Park Service and cordoned off millions upon millions of acres that we're still not allowed full access to today.
Very true.
I think our government has known about them at least that long.
Does that mean you think that these things might have been shot and then there's a body and it's covered up, or?
I think there's a number of times the bodies have been recovered. There's multiple stories that came out after the explosion at Mount St. Helens of truckloads of bodies being taken out. There are other incidents like there was an incident that happened in North Carolina where people in a rural area kept going missing, being attacked. Local sheriff contacted the government, and they sent in a team of Navy SEALs to kill a clan of Bigfoot, and those were taken out by truck. The government has known about these things for a long time, and you hear stories about people saying that they think Dogman was created in a lab, or Bigfoot was created in a lab. I don't think that is the case, and I'll tell you why. Because Native American sightings of these creatures goes back for centuries before we had that technology. Now, I'm not saying our government's not above experimenting on things they find. If they were able to capture Dogman or Bigfoot, either alive or at least enough to study, you bet your butt they'll try to weaponize it.
Yeah, that's interesting. And you're certainly right. I mean, look at things like the Tuskegee experiments. There's a long and sordid history of dirty governmental experiments, which I'm sure some kind of that type stuff still goes on. I'm fascinated how you're a writer as well in this type of field, and you write fiction. Can you tell me about some of the intersection there, like how one affects the other, like how your fiction writing might be impacted by your research, and perhaps even vice versa?
Well, the beauty of fiction is it I can tell the story I want to tell, but all the behaviors of cryptids that I use in my book are based on years of research, numerous accounts that I've read over and over. I use these accounts, and I look for, over the thousands of accounts I've read over the years, or even taken myself, I look for commonalities of behavior, and then I use those behavior patterns to create the behaviors of the creatures that I use in my books. So while the books are fiction, the behaviors of the creatures are based on observed reality.
Huh. And so your research of it is what drove you as far as, okay, I have a broad understanding, or a fairly, lot of cases to draw from, which I can then fictionalize or take elements from. So it was the actual research that came first, I think. Is that correct?
Correct.
Or
Mhm.
oh, fascinating. Fascinating. And tell me a little bit about the North American Dogman project. I mean, I only know a little bit about it. I know it's one of the main type of organizations, maybe the main, which researches this type of stuff. Can you tell me how you got involved in that, and tell me a little bit about what that organization's doing?
Well, I kind of became involved with the NADP accidentally. Um, a few years back, I was writing a book called The Lakeview Man, which was a lot of the settings happened around an abandoned campground down near Kimberling, Missouri. The Army Corps of Engineers shut it down back around the year 2000 after a number of people went missing. The park is completely overgrown. They let nature reclaim it, and but you can still get in there. I mean, but if you try to stay there after dark, they'll run you out. But I've been down in there many times, and it's a really creepy area, and I wanted to use it as a setting in the book. So one night, one of my best friends, Steve Monrotis, and his wife and my wife, decided we were just going to drive down there late one night, and then we were going to shoot a promo video for the book, The Lakeview Man, and then we were going to go into Branson and have dinner. So we drive into the park, and Steve and I get out, and the girls stay in the car. And we get out and we just shoot this little quick video, and I'm shining a flashlight around this overgrown area, and we're talking about the book, and I'm not really planning on anything happening. I mean, I was still a deputy at the time, so I was armed, and Steve's a concealed carrier, so he was armed. So it wasn't like we were unprepared, but we weren't really planning on. It wasn't an outing. We weren't there looking for cryptids. We just went there with a cell phone camera and a flashlight and shot a quick video. So I get home the next day. I go to upload the video to YouTube, and I notice in several spots of the video there was quite a bit of eye shine, and that's not uncommon. I mean, you spend any time in the woods in the dark, you're going to get eye shine. It's just going to happen. So I didn't think too much about it. Upload the video to my YouTube channel. Kind of forgot about it. About a year and a half passes. I was doing a show called The Nightmare Hunter, and we showed the video just to promote the book, the Lakeview Man, and one of the guys that was in the audience, a guy named Thomas Whitney, said, "Hey, DA, where you were shining your flashlight, something moved." And I'm like, nah, I've watched that video 100 times. There's nothing moving back there. He said, "No, I'm telling you, something moved back there." So I pulled the original video off my computer, and I sent it to a couple of buddies of mine that do video analysis. And they were able to extract frames of this video. I mean, granted, they're grainy because we shot on a cell phone. We weren't down there trying to film anything but a quick book video. But there were several frames where you can see something move out behind the tree and then duck back behind the tree. The head was very wolf shaped, and in one frame you can see its hand with claws on the tree. And when I saw that footage, I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe it was like 20 yards of us. So we went back out there in the daytime and found the exact tree, made sure there were no bushes behind it that it could have been. There was nothing back there that it could have been. There's no way it was a small animal, because it was a large head. And we found the tree and measured the spot. We kind of looked at the video and estimated would have been about 9.5 feet off the ground. So no black bear in Missouri stands 9.5 feet tall. And the arm was low enough. It wasn't like this bear had scrambled up, because the arm would have been close to the head. It was holding onto the tree. The arm was significantly lower than the head as this thing leaned out. The head looks very dog-like, and I'm freaking out. So I looked up Dogman organizations, and I found the NADP, and I contacted Nick Valente, who was the Region 3 director. He lives in New Jersey. So I sent him the video. And he had it for a couple of days before he called me. He's like, "I think you've got the best example of a type 3 dogman I've ever seen on film." He said, "I know it's grainy, but you look at that video." He said, "That is some of the most compelling footage I've seen." And he said, can we use this?" I'm like, "Absolutely." And him and I talked, and he asked me if I would join the NADP as a field investigator. So I was like, "Oh, heck yeah, absolutely." And right about that time, the Region 2, which is the Midwest director, stepped down. And Jody Cook, the founder of NADP, just offered it to me. He said, "You want to take over Region 2 as its lead investigator?" I'm like, "Sure, absolutely." So that's kind of how I became involved in the NADP. But the organization was founded to really look into this phenomenon even more. It's one of the few organizations that really specified specifically just on Dogman. And they found some pretty interesting evidence in the event. I'm sure you guys are familiar with the LBL incident, where the family of 4 was killed. One of the reasons I am 100% on board that event really happened and was covered up is because 2 of the officers that responded to it, Jody Cook met them and interviewed them before they died. They were both pretty old when he met them. Oh, wow. So he's got recorded conversations with these guys where they talk about the event. And we're told to shut up about it. So I believe that event was a true event. I've been in LBL, had a sighting in LBL. Nick and I went in there about a year ago. Actually, it was almost a year and a half. It was last July. So Nick and I went into LBL, spent about a week in there running around, and we had a sighting of a dogman near Demumbers Bay in LBL. Really creepy area. And the whole time I was in North LBL, I didn't see a single animal, not one. Which is really bizarre, and not even roadkill. Right across the canal over in Grand Rivers, there were deer walking around the campground, raccoons, possums, everything you could possibly imagine walking around the campgrounds, just out in the open. You cross that canal over into LBL, nothing. You didn't hear anything.
My mother tells a funny story. She lives in Australia with my stepfather, and they visited the land between the lakes, I don't know, before I lived in America, maybe 20 years ago. And they have very fond memories of it. And one time we had the Hendersons on, we had Elijah and I think Johnny before Johnny passed. And later she was like, we were wandering around there. We had no idea what what it was like. We wouldn't have done it if we'd heard these stories.
Well, it depends on what part of LBL you're in.
Okay.
The North is very active for Dogman, and some of the people that I talked to since I was there said, "Don't go in there. Don't go in there after dark. Don't go unarmed. Don't go alone." Well, I was there for a few days before Nick showed up. We arrived in Grand Rivers and got our condo, and for a couple of days I was running around LBL by myself in the dark. You know, as the expression goes that my mom used to say, "Fat, dumb, and happy." I'm just blundering around. My mother used to tell me when I was a small child that I would blunder in where angels feared to tread. And that's kind of been the motto of my life, even as a cop. I would just go. Uh, so I wandered around some of the creepier areas of LBL in the dark by myself, heard some weird crap, played a predator call. I used to hunt coyotes. I'm using my phone. I'm down by DeMumbers Bay and I'm playing wounded rabbit calls on my phone and listening to them echo out over the lake. And I heard something like coming toward me quickly. And I'm like, hey, I'm out here. I don't have a gun on because you're not allowed to carry firearms in there. I'm like, I don't have a gun. I'm out here by myself. I have no cell service and nobody knows where I'm at. Maybe it's time to get out of here.
Yeah, I've heard you can't go armed in LBL, and I didn't actually believe it, but that's the case, is it? That you can't
You
have a
can
firearm
hunt
in
an LBL, but it's only during specific times,
there?
and
Okay.
you have to register with the rangers register for your firearm. I I've since learned that since I'm prior law enforcement and I still carry a retired credentials, I can carry, and you can bet your bottom dollar I will be next time. But I was walking around. The only thing I had on was a pocket knife and a bad attitude.
What is somebody who's ex-law enforcement who has an understanding of, I suppose, protocols with investigation and that type of thing, what do you think the broader cryptid field is doing right, and what do you think they're doing wrong today?
I think some of the biggest problem that we're having is there's really not a lot of consistency in investigative techniques. I'm gonna be putting together a series of videos with one of my co-hosts, a couple of my co-hosts, Robbie Rains and Anthony Canatella, because they both have backgrounds in law enforcement. Robbie's still active law enforcement. We're going to put together some videos that, based on what we learned in the academy, on how to collect evidence, how to not contaminate it. We're going to do casting videos on how to properly do a cast, because a lot of people don't know how to set up a cast. I don't know that there's anything out there like that where really breaks it down step by step. So we're going to show again evidence collection. We're going to how to preserve a scene, how to properly cast, how to photograph, because it's not just, oh, I see a footprint, I need to take a picture of that. There are more criteria than that. One, you need something in the picture for scale. And two, you need to shoot multiple angles, not just dead above, because you get no depth from dead above. You want to shoot at multiple angles. I mean, they're digital images. It's not costing you anything. Take 100 of them if you need to. You can always delete them later. But take multiple pictures from multiple angles with something for scale. Uh, it's just one of those things that I think we can do more by sharing our information on proper techniques for evidence collection and things like that throughout the field than has been previously done. Because there's so many researchers that are like, nope, that's mine. I'm not telling you. I'm not sharing any information, and I think that's bad for the field. Yeah, everybody wants to be the researcher that brings in the proof. See, I don't have a dog in that fight. I have no desire to be the guy that proves anything to the world. I know these things exist from personal experience. I don't need to prove it to myself. I don't need to prove it to the guys that go with me. We're just going out and we're collecting as much evidence as we can. And I think by hoarding your evidence and not sharing your techniques with others, you're really doing a disservice to the field. So as far as research goes, my email address is always posted on my show, even my PO box. I am an open book. If you got a question or you need some information, if I've got it, it's yours. I'm happy to share anything I know, and that's the hallmark. I'm always going to do that. It doesn't matter if just being just being a schmuck saying tomorrow that, Animal Planet offered us a show on Dogman, I would still be that way. I'm not going to be like, oh, no, got to keep this close to the vest. I would always share my research and my information. I'm not ever going to keep that to myself. And I think there needs to be more of that in the field.
What do you think is the reason there was this kind of boom in awareness of Dogman and Dogman reports starting, a decade or two ago? Because I was talking to Ken Gerhard about this once, just privately in Facebook, and I said, it seems to me like there weren't a whole lot of Dogman reports the way there were Sasquatch reports like 20 years ago. But now it seems like there's as many Dogman reports as there are Sasquatch. I mean, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it seems like I hear about the same of both. What do you think led to that increase in the last decade or two?
Well, a decade ago, nobody had heard the name Dogman. Nobody knew what a Dogman was. So I think a lot of Dogman sightings were reported as Sasquatch sightings because they didn't know what else to call it. Or you can actually Google werewolf sightings and find werewolf sightings reported back for decades. There are lots of places around the world that have places like Werewolf Springs and things like that where they reported local werewolf stories. So before anybody knew what a Dogman was, or and for that matter, for anybody who had heard the word Bigfoot, they used to report wild men of the woods or hairy men that lived out in they say they were hermits that had gone feral, yet they were 7 and 8 feet tall. I don't know if there are many hermit NBA players that suddenly, covered themselves with hair that are running around the woods. So these stories go back, and you can look at newspaper clippings from the 1800s, and there are dozens and dozens of them that say wild man attacks farm or hairy man of the woods chases children. These stories are out there, and they existed long before anybody knew the buzzwords that you hear today. But I think the reason we're getting more of these reports today is, number one, I think these creatures are becoming more active. I think they're slowly developing, slowly losing their fear of humans. Also, you've got far more podcasts and shows and things like Finding Bigfoot and all of these shows on different networks that have brought this more into the mainstream. So a lot of people are less hesitant about coming forward. Of course, you still got people in high risk fields like law enforcement, judges, lawyers, who still don't want to come forward with their name because it can hurt their credibility. But you're getting people from all walks of life now bringing. It's not just the old joke about the guy with no t-shirt and there's a pair of bibbed overalls with only one of them latched going, yep, so Bigfoot, he stole my corn liquor. It's not like that anymore. You get Bigfoot reports from all over the world from people from all walks of life now. And these shows and podcasts like this have given people a forum to tell these stories. So I think that's why we've seen a dramatic increase in the number of sightings.
Yeah, that's interesting. Jen, I should let you ask some more questions. I ran away with the Dogman topic for a little while.
Oh, no, it's an interesting topic. Is there any other type of cryptids that you were interested in that you've researched? You mentioned a lake monster, right? Or
I'm really interested in Wendigo. I would really like to start investigating Wendigo sightings, but I don't believe Wendigo are actually cryptids. I think there's a supernatural element to the Wendigo. Yeah. I don't think they're really an animal. They talked about the spirit of the Wendigo possessing people. And back, I think it was 1998, 1999, somewhere around in there, there was a guy in Canada who just flipped on a Trans-Canada bus. It was a Greyhound on the Trans-Canada highway and just killed the guy next to him in the seat and started eating him. They called it Wendigo psychosis. That's the most recent one that I've heard of. He was actually not sent to prison. He was sent to a mental hospital and was released in 2016. So the guy that just snapped and ate the dude on the bus is now back out on the street among everybody.
Wow.
Then you've got the Swift Runner case where a guy was actually executed for being a Wendigo in Canada. You've got these stories that are popping up throughout an Algonquin and Canadian legend, but you're also hearing Wendigo sightings farther south now. There have been Wendigo sighted in the Appalachian Mountains. There have been Wendigo sighted in Colorado. I think that the spirit of the Wendigo is growing in power. I think it is a supernatural element, a supernatural force, and I think it's going to go where it wants to. It's the spirit of famine.
Yeah. So do you think with all the podcasts and how paranormal has become kind of a fad. Well, not a fad, but it's more popular. Everybody wants to check it out and see if it's real. And are we causing the problem when it comes to the paranormal? Or are we manifesting all of this because we keep talking about it? Because that's usually some cultures don't want to talk about stuff like that because they're afraid exactly what's happening right now would be the reason why they don't. I mean, if you thought about that before, or
there is the concept of the tulpa, where combined belief in something can make it manifest, and I think that's something similar to what's happened with the Slender Man phenomenon. How it started out as basically a creepypasta, but now people are seeing it all over the world because millions of people believe it's real.
Yeah.
But when it comes to supernatural, I mean, every one of us has got some weird story that scared the crap out of us that we think, might have been paranormal. And then there are other people that have seen full body apparitions. I don't think that's a manifestation of something that we're imagining. I think these are things that are really there. The paranormal exists, whether people want to believe it or not. There are things out there that will scare the crap out of you, and even other things that can and will hurt you. So I think dismissing the paranormal as being a product of our imagination is a disservice. Just because if you say, for example, if you don't believe in rattlesnakes, I don't believe rattlesnakes exist. Well, it'll still kill you if you step on one.
Oh yeah. Yep.
Sorry, Dean. I guess I was cracking you up there.
No, that's good. Yeah, that's good. That's a good analogy. See, I'll be honest, DA. I tend to think that some of these things aren't, I suppose, as real as the modern Western construct wants to paint things. I think there was a time in pre-modernity when we didn't have a problem with things which was supernatural also being physical. And you and Jen probably both know this. Even if you go back and look at early days of, not even early days, even relatively recent ghost hunting days, where people put talcum powder or flour on the floor to see if there's any footprints, right? People are meant to be dealing with specters, something supposedly essentially entirely supernatural, but there's still an expectation for there to be some physical interaction with the environment. It's the same with table tapping, or it's the same with, before I actually thought I heard something in my wall. I didn't think it was paranormal, but I'm like, what's that? Something's in my wall. It's probably a giant rat. But my point is, if there was something paranormal in my wall, the fact that it could knock on it and make a noise implies there's some kind of physicality. So I wonder if things like Bigfoot don't actually genuinely leave physical traces. I don't think that they're not physical, but I wonder if they transition out of here, if they're not here all the same way the ghost that haunts the back corridor of the family estate but only gets seen at midnight or something isn't there necessarily all day long or whatever. I wonder if these things can come and go from elsewhere.
It's entirely possible. I mean, when it comes to cryptids or paranormal, anybody that claims to be an expert in this field is lying to you. There are no experts in the paranormal. There are no experts in cryptozoology. All we have is theory. And that's the interesting part about this, is until something is actually brought forth and scientifically proven, all we're going to have to operate under is theory. So until that happens, everybody's theory is just as good as mine. I tell that people on my show all the time. I'm like, I'm just telling you what I think. I could be 100% wrong. Anything you guys think is just as valid as what I'm putting forward. I said, but what I'm putting forward is based on observation and collection of data. So I'm taking an educated guess, and that's all really theory is. So it could be. I mean, they could be extra dimensional. They could be psychic constructs. They could be something in between. We don't know. And unfortunately, until we get scientific proof of any or all of it, we're never going to know for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really healthy way of looking at it.
I agree.
So speaking of your podcasts and your research, and we mentioned your books earlier, how do people find all of those things? Like, can you let our audience know some URLs or some places to visit so they can see all the wonderful things you do?
Sure, absolutely. You can find even links to the podcast on my website. It's daroberts.net. My podcast is primarily on YouTube, but we do broadcast to Twitter and Facebook, but we're always looking to expand that. And the podcast is called DAX Machina. You can find that on YouTube or on Facebook, hashtag DAX Machination. So yeah, everybody out there, if you join the group, you're part of the nation. And welcome to the DAX Maka Nation. You can find my Patreon at patreon.com/DA Roberts Author, and you can find me on any social media at DA Roberts Author. That I kind of simplified everything so it's easy to find.
Well, it was great chatting to you. So interesting. I'm fascinated with Dogman tales. Again, I'm not sure what they are, but there's something very archetypal about them that just, gets one's heckles up, and you can't help but be fascinated by those things.
I think they play into the uncanny valley, the psychological theory that all across the planet, humanity from all walks of life have a same common fear of something that looks almost like us in the dark. So to me, that just says that at one time in our history, possibly back when we were just learning to make fire, that something that looked similar to us haunted us in the dark.
Yeah.
Well, what a fantastic, if terrifying note to end on. Thank you so much for visiting us with this, DA. We'll have to have you back sometime in the not too distant future.
And I'd love to.
That'd be great. And until we talk to you then, keep it weird.